Welcome to the Fire and Earth podcast with your hosts, Jason Mefford and Kathy Groover. Fire and Earth, giving you the keys to unlock your limitless potential.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Fire and Earth podcast. I'm your co-host, Jason Mefford.
And I am Kathy Groover, and I am very excited to welcome another phenomenal guest to our show, Kevin Grossman. Kevin, thanks for joining us. So I know Kevin from being on his podcast, and also he was kind enough to come to my talk at the California Human Resources Conference, and we were talking about onboarding and interviews and personality testing and all sorts of stuff. And since we want to help you unlock your limitless potential, we thought Kevin would make a phenomenal guest. So welcome aboard. Tell us a little bit about you, your background, how you got to what you're doing, and we'll dive in.
Sure. So I've been in the HR recruiting space for about 20 years, primarily on the technology side. I like to joke tongue in cheek that I play HR and recruiting on TV. But I've been in the space, and I love recruiting. When I first started over 20 years ago, I did some recruiting and sourcing myself, and the whole idea of how we recruit, hire, and retain folks has been fascinating to me ever since. So fast forward to the past 4 years, I've been running a nonprofit research organization called Talent Board and the Candidate Experience Awards. And it's all about elevating and promoting a quality candidate experience at organizations big and small across industries. Mm-hmm. We all know how much fun not it is to go through any job search at all, even in a tight job market such as today, which we could go on a little tangent about candidate ghosting too. We should probably do that later.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating. But anyway, long story short, so we're really helping employers understand that the sheer number of people that we say no to, we're in the business of no in recruiting. That's the reality. 99 out of 100 people for any given job aren't getting hired. So that number over time, the experience those individuals have, their overall level of perceived fairness in the hiring process, knowing, again, most of them are getting rejected, that affects whether or not they ever apply again for that same company, whether they refer others to that company. And if they are a consumer-based company in particular, whether or not they buy stuff. And our data really helps to kind of take employers down that path of understanding that even if they're not a consumer company, if they're a B2B company, that's really truly impacts the business still in the form of referrals primarily. So that's what we do. And we do that. We've been doing that for 9 years now. And we have lots of research and resources that we release to the wild every year and do lots of work with HR and recruiting folks all over the world.
Well, and I think that's important because some of our listeners, I mean, again, we kind of go on lots of different topics, right? But ultimately it's about helping you unlock your limitless potential,
Sure.
Move into that person that you are deep down and can be, but obviously we have to do some work. So I think it's interesting because you bring up, because I think people need to, that are going through the recruiting process, trying to look for another job, they can't place meaning on the fact that you don't get a particular job, right? So the stat you just threw out there, 99 people out of 100
on average,
yeah, will not get the job. Right. Which means, again, you don't have to place any meaning on the fact. I mean, again, it still hurts and you're like, oh, why didn't I get the job? Right. Mm-hmm. But we shouldn't probably place any self-worth meaning on that. It's just a game of numbers. Right.
It is, except that what I would recommend from a candidate's perspective, and we see this in our data and research every year, is that you should have nothing less than an acknowledgement that I'm interested in your company and your brand and this job. So it should be some level of acknowledgement, even the most basic level of consistent communication. And don't get me wrong, when you're applying at any company and there's any volume of people that are going through the hiring process, there's going to be a lot of automation that happens, right? Companies can't respond with a human to every single person that just applies, but that just some basic level of communication, that letting me know as a candidate, thank you, but we're going to pass. And that closure, that definitive closure at the end of the day, because most of us, when we apply for a job, whether it's online, in person, however the context of that is, and most of it is online today, actually, but that we're post-application, that's as far as we get.
Yep.
We're not being screened. We're not being interviewed. We're being that's it. And on our data and research, last year in 2018, it was over 50% of the candidates said that after 3 months they never heard back after they applied. That's a lot of people. And in our research is in North America, in the past couple of years, it's over 150,000 candidates that respond in our research. So that's still, it's a really good sample set overall, just in North America. And this holds true around the world. That's decreased this year so far, and we're still collecting the data for 2019, which is good. But just that basic level of acknowledgement, some communication and closure, that's at a minimum what companies should be doing, at a minimum. Not to say that, and we'll talk more about what else I think they should be doing, but as a candidate, if you're not getting that and you're not hearing back, especially in a market like today.
Right. Well, and it's about closing that loop, and it's about, I have a friend who continues to apply for jobs. Now, the downside for him is he does not have a college degree. And there are some places that even if the job doesn't really require a specific degree, you're going to be the receptionist. You don't need a college degree to be the receptionist.
Sure.
But he has applied repeatedly for these things like the city, the county, and the university here in Santa Barbara.
Right.
It's all automated. It kicks him out immediately because he checked the box that says no college degree, which sucks because he's brilliant. He's an incredible writer. He would be perfect for the job. And every interview he gets the job. But it's unfortunate because he's being kicked out through some computer system and not even given the opportunity to show what he can do. And on one hand, I get it because you're weeding people out. But on the other hand, you're weeding someone out that would be phenomenal for the job. So, I mean, and as a candidate, there's no way around that, I guess, right? You can't really call them and be like, hey, seriously, I want to talk to you about this. I mean, like, what do you do as the candidate when you're getting doors closed all the time because of this automation?
Well, that's where your network comes into play. And what I mean by that is it's going to be really difficult today and going forward to get around auto screening. It's happening even in the small, even levels of government, as you just referenced, to global multinational organizations that have any level of volume at all, even smaller volumes. They're using automation, they're auto screening people out. So we've been telling in recruiting in HR for years that we should really build and nurture our networks that we have over time. And I think one of the things that it's always helpful, doesn't always guarantee that they're still going to get that next step, is to, who do I know internally, or who do I know that knows somebody inside that can get me introduced? Even in city government, where, and I know because I volunteer for a commission that in our city government here in Santa Cruz, as a volunteer. I'm not working for city government, but I know that there's processes that they go through, right? It's a lot of hoops to be hired for the county, for the city, state, federal government, whatever. But it can help, to understand who's inside and how can somebody give me some inside baseball, or give me a look so I'm not auto screened out. It still might not mean that they're going to make it to the next step, but the network helps because you're not going to get around that automation, and it's not going anywhere. And now with machine learning and natural language processing and what we're calling AI in recruiting, it's not really AI, but we're moving in that direction. There's going to be a lot more of that. We're not going to get around that. So it's really important to find out, who do I know who knows somebody.
So this is where LinkedIn would come in handy.
Well, yes.
Yeah, because I see this all the time, right? Because in my little niche in the business world, I see it from auditors and people in risk management and compliance, because that's kind of the main area that I serve kind of in the business industry. But I see this all the time, and Kathy, you refer to LinkedIn, and I'm big on LinkedIn. I've got lots of connections. I'm active on there every day. And I think that point that you bring up about networking is so important, because I see that this is kind of the scenario that I see all the time. Somebody goes in, they have a job, they put their head down, they don't worry about, they're not really communicating, they're not building real connections with other people. And then all of a sudden they find themselves in trouble, wanting to switch a job, or maybe they just got laid off. And now all of a sudden, baby, they're out there networking, right? And so they're reaching out to all these people that they haven't talked to in 5 or 10 years. And it's like, why the hell are you talking to me now? Oh, you need a job.
Right.
Well, sure.
So, the whole idea with actually networking and keeping up those connections, and I'm not saying networking like in the, passing business cards around, but actually making real connections and friendships with people along the way, so that when you need it, you can actually leverage it, exactly like what you're talking about.
Well, you
only going to somebody when you need something, then it's like, what?
Well, and I know, and that's hard. I mean, you're right, because there's two different things going on, because you've got referrals are really important. They're really important for organizations still today. Companies depend on referrals heavily for recruiting. It can be for hiring, especially. It can be 25, 30, 35, upwards of, sometimes I've heard 40, 50% of hires can come from referrals. It's really important. So again, if I'm an employee at company X and I'm like, you know what, you really need to, I have my friend Sally here who really could do this work. We should get her into the pipeline and see where that goes. And our data shows that of those candidates who are referred, and our data is again measuring the more of the rejected experience. We do have some hires in our population, but part of our criteria from the companies is 80% or more of those you survey in our research have to be those that didn't get hired, because we're trying to impact, again, showing you the impact. But 43% of those candidates who were referred, who still didn't get hired, 40 of the candidates that were referred and didn't get hired, 43% of them are still going to increase their relationship with that company, even though they didn't get hired. Well, all that means is that they're more willing to apply again, refer others, and maybe buy stuff just because of the relationship. At least they tell us through our data, right? So there's a value there in regards to why referrals are so important at the end of the day. It's also really hard for us to nurture relationships beyond 10 people, much less 150 people, according to the social network research, right? True. So, but at the end of the day, I know that there's a lot of connections that I have that I don't talk with that often, but I know that if I did some outreach or vice versa, at the very least, I'm still willing to say, listen, if there's anybody in my network that you'd like to meet, or vice versa, then we'll do that for each other. It doesn't mean that I'm not getting you a job. I'm not, but I'm happy to introduce you to somebody, and then you take it and run with it. There's a value to that too, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
Absolutely. And it is, when we've had a couple different experts on talking about social media and about building those relationships and finding those personal connections. I remember when I was an actor down in LA, and talk about rejection, good Lord. Can't tell you, no was like, I heard no 30 times a day, even though they basically, the sheet basically said, send in Kathy Gruber. I still didn't get the role. And I went, it's hard to take that one, not personally, when it basically describes me to a T. But anyway, but I remember when I was directing theater, I would look at the resumes, and if there was someone who had sent in their headshot for that acting gig, if they went to Point Park, which is my university, I would automatically call them in, because I knew the quality of the education.
Sure.
I knew the instructors, I knew the shows. So there was that sameness. There was, they must be great because they went to the same school as me. And that's how the human brain works. We look for those things and those differences.
That's bias. That's unconscious bias.
That's always, and they didn't always get the role,
right?
But they got the audition because I knew the quality of their work. So before we got on the air, we were talking about personality testing, and I think this is fascinating. Knowing if you're extrovert, introvert, I don't even remember what they all are. I used to know this, but talk about that in the role of hiring and in the role of what's happening with that these days, because I think that's getting more buzz, I believe.
So two things: I don't play an employment lawyer on TV either, nor do I play one assessment expert. But what I do know with the organizations that we work with. Let me talk about first what employers are leaning more on, and then we'll come back to personalities testing, because I think that is a nice connect the dot there. Mm-hmm. So job simulations, for example, and there's a big bucket of things, but it could be simulating a job on the computer. It could be in person, setting up a scenario. This is what you're going to do on the job. Now do it, and let's see how you perform.
Whoa.
And across industries too. And there are assessment companies out there Virtual Job Trido is one. There's many others that are actually providing these kinds of job simulation assessments and tests. And that's where we're seeing a lot more of employers leaning on, because there is a lot more validity and reliability in that, just the sheer body of knowledge and research that's gone into those assessments. Also, just testing for job skills too, and basic experience, those things. The problem that I have personally with personality tests, and what I've read, and you and I were sharing about the same NPR show that we listened to that was talking about it as well, is that they're not really good indicators of future performance on the job. They talk about, they kind of put you in this box of what the kind of person or type you may be, whether it's Myers-Briggs or the DISC, for example. There's a lot of, and I'm not trying to disparage that whole industry around those kinds of tests, but I'm hearing anecdotally over and over again, they haven't been really good predictors. I'm sure that they could probably argue that with me and give me that data, but the organizations, they're just not. And I just think that, we talk about introvert, extrovert, right? Just that example alone, none of us are one or the other. We're like on a spectrum of something, right? We may be more, we're very social people, but then we like our quiet time afterwards, right? Or vice versa. I mean, it's not that simple. And that there's some value of understanding what kinds of people that we really are. But in regards to predicting future performance on the job, I think there's been a big disconnect there. Overall, from what I see and hear in the industry, and again, not an assessment expert, but I think that's the case. So.
Yeah, and one of the things that was on this NPR interview was, it was a company that was doing something like, it was either social work, or they were dealing with at-risk youth or veterans with PTSD, something like that. And everybody had been in their roles forever. And then the company brought in some consultant, some external consultant, who administered all these personality tests, and then basically turned to these social workers who had been thriving in the job and said, you're not qualified to do this, even though you've been doing it 15 years and you're great at it. And they reorganized this and they fired people because this one person came in with this one test. And it just shook up the entire company. And they interviewed this woman, and she's like, I was perfect in this job. And suddenly, because one guy did one kind of test that wasn't even scientifically bad, it wasn't even one of the more popular ones. It was just like this, what Disney princess are you? Or whatever the heck it was. And, she wasn't Snow White, so she got fired. And, but it's interesting, because I have clients and friends who, when they were running their corporations, so heavily relied on the personality tests, not so much for the hiring and firing, but for the who's going to work together on a team. And yes, and there's this real life experience of, I can work with introverts, and I can work, I'm very extroverted, and it's a matter of adaptation, which I think you kind of miss with all this automated quiz taking stuff. It's not looking at a human being.
I prefer, what Star Wars character am I, actually?
Oh, okay.
That's the one that my wife would be Star Trek, but I would be Star Wars. So
Star Wars and a Star Trek in the same house.
But we're fans of both of them. But yes, she's more Next Generation and I'm more Star Wars. So but I to that point, I think that there's also been research that's been done by other kinds of assessment data companies in HR and recruiting space, that are showing that past experience and education are not even that great of predictors of on-the-job performance for certain jobs. There is a potential. This is another area of, which is, I think it's exciting, that we're seeing with assessment and psychometric technology going, and the whole industry going, is where I can better predict the potential of somebody to do a certain kind of job based on what they have done before in their experience. Education, by the way, doesn't really play into it. In fact, and I know that and that goes back to the point you were talking about with your friend not having the degree. And thankfully, there are larger companies that have been in the past few years that have been really public, like the big four accounting firms, about how the fact that they're putting less emphasis on education doesn't mean they're not excluding it altogether. For certain, there probably still want MBA folks for the high level analyst positions.
Sure.
But they're putting less emphasis on education and more on what experience and skills do you have today, and what is your potential to do something more in these roles. That's what's exciting of where we're seeing the assessment. And I don't think personality things fit into those buckets very well anymore. They're still being used. It's still a pretty big business and industry.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe, I don't know. I just think that there's a lot more exciting science that's happening today that is helping the companies to better predict. Still doesn't give the candidate a voice, unfortunately. Although, one of the things as a candidate, another recommendation that I make is that if you're having to take tests and assessments when you're going through the hiring process for whatever company, ask for feedback on your results. Even if, whether they offer or not, ask for it. And if they don't give it to you, whatever, and they give you the line, "No, we don't do that, I'm sorry, for compliance reasons," that's a bunch of BS. I would argue at the end of the day, companies who give a modicum of job specific related feedback to candidates, that goes a long way with perceived fairness and that candidate's willingness to want to do something again with that brand. And I tell you, I mean, again, I'm not an employment lawyer at all, but you can do this in a right way. We work with organizations that are doing it, and it pays dividends big time when you're just willing to give some feedback, just something. So if you're going to make me take these tests, give me something back that I can hang my hat on. What do I need to work on? Where are my strengths and weaknesses? That's a big benefit. So if you're not getting that as a candidate, go to the next place. Even if you're moving, I don't know, I would be wary about that at the end of the day. I'm just hoping that more companies are willing to break that down and understand the value of giving feedback. So
what I think is actually in what you kind of said there, you bring up another point that I think, as we're talking to, a lot of the people are going to be those candidates going through this process. And I see people all the time that, they kind of come from a sense of lack, because obviously they've just been fired. I got to pay rent and all these things next year. They're trying to find another job quickly. Mm-hmm. And I think, again, for your full potential to be unlocked, you have to realize that you're interviewing the company as much as they're interviewing.
Yeah, people forget that.
People forget that all the time. And so then they end up taking a job. They get in there. It probably wasn't a good fit for them. They find out afterwards, they're miserable, and then they're having to do it again, right? Because so it just perpetuates more stress, more everything else for them, because now they're not happy where they're at and they have to go find another job. And so, sometimes, again, it can be, the Garth Brooks song, I thank God for unanswered prayers kind of thing, kind of just ran in my head, that sometimes it's a really good thing to get turned down. Right. By some employers, but we as a candidate should be much more proactive of thinking, is this where I want to work, right?
Well, exactly.
Yeah, because I remember a time, when I was getting a job, and it was a big brand name, something that I was proud and would want to work for this company. And I went through it was group interviews. They flew me in. I went through and interviewed with all these people. I think, 2 of the 3 was like, I mean, these people are awesome. I would love working here. The third one was kind of like, I don't know, maybe just a personality difference. But then I sat down in front of the person who was going to be my boss, and we started talking. And I just remember it was about 5 minutes into it, I had this thought in my head, like, I cannot work for this man. And, so again, it was like, I didn't say I'm done and, I'm not going to take the job at that point. Maybe I should have had the courage to do that, but they passed on me. Was I disappointed? Heck no, I didn't want the job. Right. After I talked to him.
Reach out with your feelings, Luke.
Yeah.
Back to the Star Wars thing.
For those keeping score at home, yes, that's a Star Wars.
Two for Star Wars. Okay. Snow White would say, no, I don't even like Disney princesses. Anyway, and it's interesting because I've had clients say, oh, I don't know if I want the job, so I don't know if I want to interview it. To me, it's like, practice your interviewing, practice your, it's like, I'm dating again, and I'm on one of the dating sites, and I was talking to a bunch of women about this, and I said, yeah, I've had like 6 or 7 dates. It's so much fun. And they're like, oh, it's miserable. What's the key to having fun with it? And I said, don't put any expectations on it. Like, go meet these people, have fun, look at it for that thing in the moment. If you walk into every doorway going, this is going to be a lifetime relationship, and I'm going to spend the rest of my, well, then you're putting all this pressure on yourself, and you're going to You're going to be miserable. I said, lighten it up. Have fun with it. Use that as an experience to figure out what you do want in the future. And I've said that to so many people about job interviews.
Yes.
And what's interesting is I do a lot of work with women in tech and girls who code and, those types of organizations.
Sure.
And one of the statistics at this women's conference that I was just at was if, talking about even applying for jobs, if a man meets only 60%, I think it was 60% of the criteria, he's like, oh, hell yeah. And he applies. If a woman doesn't meet like 90% of the criteria, she doesn't even send in an application.
I've heard that too.
Which is sad and fascinating. And it's like, I want to encourage everybody, just frickin' send it in.
Yeah.
If they say no, they say no. But if they say yes, then it opens up to a whole nother opportunity. And if you can get feedback, and I totally agree with you on the feedback thing, asking for that is so important. We just have a couple minutes left because we're really blowing through an entire half hour of time. Jason, any final thoughts? Kevin, anything you want to add in that's practical? We'll get this closed up pretty soon.
I think that, again, candidates, what they tell us through the research that all of us as candidates want more of. We want to know more. We want more transparency in an organization. What is it really like to work there? What are the employees saying about it? What are the testimonials? We're doing our own research on Glassdoor and other reviews anyway.
I was going to say, yeah.
And is there a way that I can hear from who I'm actually going to be working for if I was to make it that far, particularly if I'm in the screening and interviews, final interview stage, talking with the hiring manager? That's why some companies are experimenting, promoting their jobs with their hiring managers, saying, you're going to work for me and this is what you're going to do. So seeing more of that. And I just think, again, companies just really need to understand that there is a definitive impact on their business and their brand over time by just the sheer volume of people that they're saying no to. So it's important to take a look at their recruiting process from before candidates even apply all the way to those they hire.
Yeah.
I have nothing else. I mean, it sounds...
We've solved, once again, in a half an hour, we've solved all the world's problems. This is great. Okay, this is such a great conversation. I'm so glad that we did this.
Thank you for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. So where can people reach you? Where can people listen to your podcast and find more information and research about what you guys do?
So all of our research articles, events that we do, including the podcast, which is called the Candy Shop Talk Podcast, everything is on our site at thetalentboard.org. Thetalentboard.org. Easy to find. All the resources are there. If anybody wants to connect with me on LinkedIn and just social in particular, I'm a pretty big networker. So it's just Kevin W. Grossman. Search for me, you'll find me. And that's how you find us and me.
Yay. Awesome. This has been a phenomenal episode. I'm Kathy Groover, and I can be reached at kathygroover.com.
And I'm Jason Mefford. I can be reached at jasonmefford.com. So go out and unlock your limitless potential, and we'll see you on a future episode of the Fire and Earth Podcast. See ya.
See ya.